Thank you. I want to pass things over to Dr. Larson. Very briefly, I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to who Dr. Larson is. Dr. Larson is the director of the Companion Animal Vaccines and Immunodiagnostics Service Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine. What a mouthful. Began her career in veterinary vaccinology 33 years ago after several years in private clinical practice. Dr. Larson enjoys providing titer testing and infectious disease consultation for veterinarians, dog breeders, pet owners, and animal shelters. A unique service offered by the CAVIDS lab is nomograph analysis of a breeding female's antibody levels against canine parvovirus and distemper virus to allow vaccination timing to be tailored for an individual litter with earlier confirmation of immunity than would otherwise be possible. So with that, Dr. Larson, I will pass things over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you invited me here to talk about something that I'm very excited about. And thank you, Dr. Hesser, for sharing your beautiful bit. She is so handsome, and I don't get to see ultrasound very often anymore. That's not part of my routine. So seeing those little tiny baby fetuses it really made my day. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see that now. Are we good, Nicole?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. So there's the title of the talk. Um, Thanks, Nicole, for your lovely introduction to me. I guess the only things I would add to that is that I have been a member of the Canine Vaccine Guidelines Task Force for AHA. And what really is important is that I'm Team Labrador. This is my Labrador Soko. I lost him a couple of years ago. He's not with me anymore, and I'm still waiting to find the next Labrador. But that's that's where I am with the Black Labs. So you mentioned CAVIDS Laboratory. It's just so much easier to just say CAVIDS rather than that whole mouthful of companion animal vaccines and immunodiagnostic service laboratory. We're here at the University of Wisconsin School of Vet Med. And we do work with a lot of different clients, including industry and dog breeders. So every time I give this talk, I like to dedicate it to my grandmother. This is Grace. She was a hobby breeder of miniature poodles, and I got to work with her growing up. So I have a very soft spot in my heart for breeders. I know a lot of what you're going through. Didn't do fancy things like your lovely ultrasound, but she gave me what I call my third favorite job of all of the jobs I've had. Number one is being a mother to my kids. Number two, being a veterinarian. Number three, from my grandma, I was her lead puppy socializer. So all of you know how important socialization is and what a good gig that was all I needed to do was play with puppies. The other person who I have a lot of gratitude to is Dr. Ronald Schultz. I worked with him here in his lab for 26 years before his retirement back in 2016. Everything I know about canine immunology, I learned from him, and he has been an amazing blessing in my life. I'm sorry to say that we lost him back in April of 2024. So let's dig in here. What are the goals for this talk? What I would like you to have at the end of this is a general understanding of how vaccines work and how they can fail, how nomograph analysis works, right? How do we calculate those? How you can use it in your breeding program, and what you should not be expecting from the nomograph. We'll also have a little bit of time to talk about approaches to those high-risk situations. So let's dig into vaccines. I'm sure that you are familiar with this, but I would like to be sure everyone is on the same page. Right now, we classify our canine vaccines into either core or non-core. Our non-core vaccines are vaccines against diseases that aren't hugely widespread or don't cause deadly disease, or they're vaccines that only induce partial immunity. These are vaccines that should be used or not based on lifestyle risks, right? What kind of lifestyle do you and your dog have? The core vaccines, on the other hand, these are vaccines that protect against very significant diseases that can even include death. These are diseases that are widespread, pretty much global. And these are vaccines that induce a very good level of immunity. These are vaccines that all dogs should receive regardless of their lifestyle. So here I've put them into boxes for you. On the non-core side, we have the canine flu, Lyme, Bordetella, rattlesnake, and there are others, but the big thing with those is that, as I said, their use is based on risk. Most of these vaccines are a killed type of vaccine, and so their immunity only lasts for about 1 year. When we're over here on the core side, here we have a lot of the viruses, parvovirus, distemper virus, and adenovirus. Adenovirus is the causative agent for hepatitis. So sometimes you'll hear it in that, all those letters in the combination vaccine, that's the one that causes the H, right, for hepatitis. Rabies is also considered a core. Like I said, widespread, deadly diseases. One thing that's fairly new is that leptospira is being pushed as being moved to the core box where that particular disease occurs. So remember, core for all dogs, non-core for some dogs. So how do vaccines work? I'm going to show you here a slide that we use when we teach our veterinary students. I'm part of the course, the veterinary immunology course. And this image shows what happens after a vaccine is administered to a dog and the different cell handoff, right? Handoff from one cell to the next within different portions of the lymph node. And you'll see we've also included here the different chemical signals that the different cells pass on to each other. Now, you might be looking at that and be wondering, is this going to be on the test? No, there's no test. Please calm down, take it easy. Instead, what we're going to do is focus in on the two most important major types of vaccines. We have our killed vaccines and our modified live ones. And we're going to do that by going through a story. So the story is our naive puppy. We're going to represent that by this cute little buckaroo here, this little cowboy. And we're going to assign the cowboy to learn about horses, right? So our virus will be represented by a horse. So you may have heard of a type of immunity called natural immunization. That would be like this, where we put our little buckaroo on top of a wild horse and hope he stays on. So it is true that the immunity that's induced by this type of approach is the best immunity that can be found. This is very good immunity. But the problem is our poor little buckaroo has to live through this experience, right? If he stays on there for the 5-second ride, he'll remember for the rest of his life. But we hope that he's alive at the other end. The bottom line here is let's not do this approach. If we don't absolutely, it comes to us by mistake. So let's talk then about killed vaccines. Now, in the story, our buckaroo, we're teaching him about horses by giving him a textbook. Read these chapters in this book, right? So what we'll be doing then is, you know what it's like if you try to read a textbook. You don't remember it for very long. You need to have refreshers frequently, right? You need to read that. And often you need to accompany it with a cup of coffee, right? So the coffee here represents adjuvant. That is a portion of the vaccine. It's an additive to killed vaccines that the purpose is to keep the immune system interested, right? By inducing an inflammation and keeping the immune system engaged with that a little longer. So most of our non-core vaccines fall into this category. What does the antibody response look like? So here we have a first dose of this killed product, which is called the prime dose, and we see some antibody come up. Then we give a boost. That's the second dose, and we see a much stronger response. This is what you'll hear veterinarians call the prime boost response. And our antibody then does go up nice and high. But remember, this is reading the textbook, right? We forget. So by a year or so, another refresher is needed. So here's our annual boost for this one with the response again. So that is the killed vaccine. What about our modified live? Now, let's put our little buckaroo, our little cowboy on a pony. So what we have now is an actual experience, right? He's interacting with the horse, not just reading a book. He's there and trying to stay on, right? And have a relationship with the horse. So by doing this, we have a safe way to have very good immunity, right? So this is going to last for a long time. We don't need that cup of coffee because this is a great experience. And this is what we see with our modified live parvo, distemper, and adeno vaccines. What does the antibody look like? Well, here we have our dose of vaccine, and we have everything, right? All of our response is there with that one single dose. One dose is both prime and boost. And the reason is because it's infectious, right? That vaccine virus enters the dog's cells and replicates, right? It's like the disease, only it's instead of a bucking bronco, it's a pony tied up on a pony ride. So the other thing that's very nice about this antibody is that for these viruses, adeno, parvo, and distemper, we have what is called sterilizing immunity. This is the best level of antibody-based immunity that we can have. And what happens with this is that the antibody coats the viruses. It binds to them in such a way that they are neutralized. They can't enter the cell. They can't infect. The virus is sterilized. So that's who our target is there when we say sterilizing immunity. We're not sterilizing the animal, we're sterilizing the virus. And that level of antibody that provides sterilizing immunity has been proven by challenge of immunity studies. And many of them, we've done those here in our lab way back in the day when Dr. Schultz was still here. So challenge of immunity is when we actually experimentally try to make dogs sick, and we find that they are completely protected. I've written here deadbolt on the door because I want you to think about it, that they can't enter. The virus is kept out of the cell. So our modified live vaccines have been an amazing godsend to us here, anyone who loves dogs. This has been an amazing thing that we have, and induces really good immunity. So I've got a graphic here that shows when parvovirus came into the worldwide dog population. I'm old enough that I was in high school at that time in the 70s when this first came out. And boy, I tell you, it was apocalyptic. It was just awful. And it made a huge impact on me as, a teenager who wanted to become a veterinarian. I watched the impact on my community, including on my local veterinarian. But you can see that as it exploded, it came down fairly quickly too. And that was for two reasons. The explosion, because the entire population was naive. There was not a dog on earth that had an antibody response or any kind of immune response before that virus emerged into the population. That's the explosion. Then the downward part of this line represents both natural immunity. We had some dogs that survived and they helped to stop the spread because they were immune. but also we developed a vaccine. And we see a nice, fast decline in that line. And then some further improvements to the vaccines happened there in 1994. I'm happy that I was part of that. So the other thing is that this immunity lasts for a very long time. Studies that we've done here in the Schultz lab showed immunity lasted for up to 9 years post-vaccination. And, dogs that were actually immune, that immunity lasted for 9 years. And that was a challenge of immunity study. We found in our client dogs, of course, we're not challenging them, but in our service, we get many thousands of samples every year. And we've found that up to 13 years post previous vaccination, dogs can remain protected against these viruses. One thing to keep in mind about distemper, adeno, and parvovirus is that they don't mutate a lot. They might change a little bit over time, but the main part of them that they use to dig into the cell and get entry into the cell, that just doesn't change. It's highly conserved, and our antibody remains effective against it. So you may remember that I said a single dose of modified live vaccine will induce good, strong immunity. But then you may be wondering, why are we giving all these multiple doses to our puppies? As breeders, you know that we do this, we give a series. So the standard schedule is here, 8 to 9 weeks, 12 to 13 weeks, and 15 to 16 weeks of age, and then again at 1 year. There's some move to move that 1 year dose forward to 6 months, and there's good reasons for that. On the left side of this slide, we have a high risk environment. So this would be puppies that are in, let's say, an animal shelter or a large kennel that's undergoing an outbreak. In those instances, we would give them vaccine every 2 weeks, beginning sometimes even earlier than 6 weeks of age. So why? The reason is that usually we don't know which one of those doses will actually get through to infect our litter, right? To infect, replicate, and immunize them. So I'd like to illustrate this with a story. So I have a story for you of 2 6-month-old dogs, Amelia and Pringles. So Amelia and Pringles met at doggy puppy basic training, right? Basic obedience training. And they realized that they went to the same vet and that their dogs had the same vaccine at the same schedule, 8, 12, and 15 weeks of age. Once they got past their basic puppy kindergarten and basic obedience, you can see Amelia looks like she's just made for agility. So she's moving on to agility, and Pringles, our little retriever here, just wants to be a good family dog. But they really enjoyed each other, and so they kept doing play dates. And unfortunately, at the dog park, they were both exposed to parvo. So then what happened? Let's start with Pringles. Those of you who know the retriever, like me, you recognize this beautiful tool, this magical thing here called the chuck it. Pringles was all about the chuck it. She's like, come on, let's go, let's throw the ball, and not up chucking. So she was completely protected. She saw no parvo. What went right? She wasn't just vaccinated, she was immunized. And so remember, sterilizing immunity, that was the hero in this case for Pringles. That antibody bound the virus. It wasn't able to even get into her cells at all. She was completely protected. Unfortunately for Amelia, not the same case. For her, she did come down with parvo, a pretty serious case. She needed to be hospitalized for about 3 days. She had intensive care with fluids and other treatments. She did survive. So what went wrong? She was vaccinated, but not immunized. And why? So here's a slide talking about causes of vaccine failure to immunize. And several of these we can just cross off our list because we know both Pringles and Amelia went to the same vet, had the same product at the same schedule. So there wasn't improper handling of the vaccine. was dosed correctly, etc. Genetic non-responder is a possibility, but overwhelmingly, number one cause is here highlighted: maternally derived antibody interference. So remember, sterilizing immunity. For Amelia, sterilizing immunity was actually the villain in her story. So what happened for her? Maternally derived antibody bound that vaccine virus. The vaccine virus couldn't infect her, couldn't replicate. So even though she had 3 doses of vaccine, at the end of that, she was still naive and so susceptible to parvovirus. So let's talk about maternal antibody transfer. So dogs are different from humans. Newsflash. The thing here is that with humans, we have some antibody across the placenta. With almost all of our veterinary species, we have almost none, like practically zero antibody from the mother across to the puppy across the placenta. And so because of that, colostrum is essential. That is the main way that our neonates, our newly born puppies, get antibody to protect them in their early weeks and the first few months, basically. So the thing with that is that during their first 12 hours at the most, their little guts are open in a way that they can absorb antibody molecules from what they've ingested. So when they ingest that colostrum, the antibody is able to go into their circulation. After that 12-hour period, there is no more transfer. The gut is closed then, as it should be, right? We need to not have things coming into our circulation through the gut. Remember, this is antibody, and it's going to function exactly the same way as actively produced antibody, like Pringles had, to protect her. So we see sterilizing immunity with maternally derived antibody as well. Thing about that is it's temporary, right? It's just a gift that the mother has passed on to the puppies. So let's talk about that degradation. So what we have is that as time goes by, we have a half-life degradation, right? We know every 12 days, basically, we have half as much of the antibody that we started with. So that slope is shown here on this graph. And you can see we're started at a high point and we're moving down. We have this box here called critical period, also known as window of susceptibility. This is that time frame that's probably the most dangerous point of a puppy's life, where there's enough antibody still remaining to block vaccine, but not enough to protect against the disease-causing virus. That wild horse can break down the door. The age that we go into that period is going to vary, right? Because it depends on where we started. So this graph and this work was originally done by Dr. Skip Carmichael at Cornell back in the 80s. He's one of my heroes up there along with Dr. Schultz. And I think this is actually his graphic. And people sometimes think, well, things that were done in the 80s, that's ancient history. So we repeated his work with some of my vet students. And this is what we have here. So we had a large group of puppies. This was in an experimental research colony that had differing levels of maternally derived antibody at day 42, that's 6 weeks. So we vaccinated them with the monovalent parvo and checked again in 2 weeks later to see how many of them responded. What percentage of response did we get? Hopefully you can see this. When the titer of the MDA, maternally derived antibody, was more than 1 to 80 in our assay, not a single puppy responded, 0% response. As we move across to the right at 1 to 80, we had 20%, et cetera, et cetera. As we go further out here, we get to the last bar where we had titers that were not detectable. Our response rate was 91%. That represents the same percentage that we see in adult dogs that have been vaccinated. no vaccine really is going to be 100%. There are many different causes of it not to work other than maternal antibody. So, nomograph, how does this work? So, what you can see with this graphic, it's very imprecise, but it's there to show you how this works. You can see that the angle of decline for each of these different lines is the same, right? It's the same degradation rate, but depending on the starting point will make a difference for how long it takes for it to go away. So with the nomograph, we do a conservative estimate of how long maternal antibody might remain able to block vaccine from immunizing. We have a known half-life degradation that we put in there. Something that is helpful for people to remember when they're talking about nomograph is to think of it as, when is there no maternal antibody? So hopefully that little mnemonic will help you. And what we end up with at the other side of this analysis is a tailored vaccination schedule unique to a specific litter. So why should we do this? Well, here are a few reasons. I've put the bell curve here to help me to remember to mention to you that there's that average right in the middle. Average bitches will end up with a schedule that meets the standard schedule. And why do you suppose that was? Because they used nomographs to develop that standard schedule. It's based on the average bitch. However, that range of titers for bitches is really wide. And so what if we have a bitch with, let's start over here on the right side, high titers. There, we could see vaccine blocked in her litter beyond the standard end of the schedule. Usually they stop at 16 weeks. If her titers are high, could be blocked beyond that. And this is like the most significant risk factor for puppies that, even though they've been vaccinated, can come down with core diseases later on in that first year of life. How about low levels? This is actually, for some people, this is a better scenario, because here we could finish early with this litter and then do follow-up testing at an early time. And the wonderful thing there is, wow, we could do that. A very important socialization time frame with peace of mind, right? We know that our puppy is protected against these truly dangerous viruses. And we could go to the dog park and not worry about what they might pick up as far as parvo distemper. And that is going to eventually then lead to better human dog bond, right, over the long term, and make for a better behaved puppy, right? A better canine citizen. It also will tell us if this puppy is susceptible earlier in life, and maybe we'll want to start vaccination a little sooner. So when you get a nomograph report, it will have at the top information about your bitch, her titers, our interpretation of is she protected or not, the next steps that we suggest for that bitch, and then the vaccination suggestions for the litter. And at the very bottom is the part that I like. I really like this. So I developed this. This is the graphic part that I'm showing you now. So let me just walk you through it. This particular dam is named Smoke. We have her distemper titer and her parvo titer there shown at the top. Then if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see at day of birth, day 0, we've put those numbers in there directly. This very first step is very conservative. The reasoning is that we have found that most bitches transfer in the rate of about 80%, meaning that 80% of her titer is what she passes to her litter. However, we did find that up to a third of the bitches were up into 90, up to 100. So we're to be conservative for how long maternal antibody may last in these litters, we're going to use 100% transfer rate. So we put that here in this first column at the bottom. Now you may notice that there are numbers above and below those bolded numbers that were what we reported as her titer. What we have there is that we are controlling for slight variability that is inherent to these assays. They're not exact, right? This isn't a chemical assay, it's a biologic assay. So we have some variability, and it also will control for variability within the litter, right? We just don't see huge variation in titers of maternal antibody in litters unless, say, one came like a day late. You know, those sort of crazy situations can happen. But a general normal litter, this will control for that. So as we're looking now, let's go across toward the right. Every 12 days, we have half as much of that antibody. So here we go across from 320 to 160 to 80 by 24 days, et cetera, as we go. You'll notice that we put a color here to turn to gold when we reach the point where we're starting to get below what we can detect. All right, and then here's the vaccination suggestions for smokes litter. We suggested a first dose of distemper adenoparvo at 8 weeks of age, and then again at 12 weeks, with a test at 14 weeks, 2 weeks after that last dose. That first dose, suggested at 8 weeks of age, has about a 50% chance of successfully immunizing a puppy. So we want to be able to get on board as fast as we can with the first dose that has a good chance of actually doing the job. And then we finish up with a dose that has 90% chance, right, of immunizing. And then that follow-up at the end. So that is that graphic. So if you remember, we had a bad surprise with Amelia, right? A vaccinated dog that wasn't immune. How can we avoid that? Here's something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I tell my vet students, I want this on my tombstone when I die. Titer test your puppies. 2 weeks after you think you've given your last dose in the series, get them tested and make sure that you check your work. And I highly, strongly, very much suggest you do that, whether you do choose to do a nomograph on the bitch or not, because you don't want to be surprised, right? Let's make sure that our lovely, valuable puppies make it and are well protected. So remember, we didn't do a nomograph for Amelia or Pringles, but what if we had? Or let's just say, what if we tested them at 18 weeks of age? Let's just choose that. Here's Amelia. Remember, she's our one who succumbed to parvo. And she had 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks for her doses of vaccine. If we would have tested her at 18 weeks of age, we'd have found out right away, oh, she's not protected. She needs another dose. Now, if we had done a nomograph for this litter, this is how it would have looked. We would have discovered that her dam, who I've written here as Lucinda, has a high titer against parvo. Look at the bottom. 8 weeks, blocked. 12 weeks, blocked. 15 weeks, now we're into that coin flip, right? The 50-50 chance. Unfortunately for Amelia, the coin flip did not go in her favor, and she was unprotected until exposed. So how about Pringles? Let's just look at that one. So with Pringles, if we tested her at 18 weeks of age, we would have found very nice titer against distemper and parvo. She's protected against both. She is free to roam around the dog park now. Here are her doses of vaccine, 8, 12, and 15 weeks of age. We probably could have tested her at 14 weeks of age and found out the same result, that she was protected. So if you remember, for these two puppies in the story, they were exposed to parvo when they're about 6 months of age. What if it had happened sooner? What would the outcome have been? So if Pringles had been exposed at 10 weeks of age, right here, she has a 50-50 chance, right? That 8-week dose didn't immunize her, and she could have come down with parvo at that young age. This is to help to illustrate for you that window of susceptibility. Even though she's vaccinated, she's not yet immunized at that age. If this same exposure were to happen for Amelia, remember, who had a lot of antibody from her mom, she probably would have been protected against parvo. So let's talk about limitations of the nomograph. Remember, this is the no-mo, right? When is there no-mo maternal antibody remaining? So it's geared toward the end of the scenario, right? So the problem with the nomograph is that we can't control what happens between that bitch and her litter. There are many causes that can cause failure of that transfer of immunity, and I've listed a few of them here. The bottom line is that you can't expect that nomograph to say, oh yeah, my litter is protected early on, because these sort of things can happen. All that we can say is your bitch has antibody. If she does a good job, your puppies will be protected, but don't expect that. So what if we have a situation where we have a lot of parvo? So that's this one here. If you know you have parvo in your kennel and you know you have a high risk situation, what we suggest here is, instead of doing a nomograph on the bitch, let's do a nomograph on the puppies directly. And so we suggest that you draw a sample from, if you know, firstborn and lastborn. That would give us a good range for the litter. If you don't know that, then let's go for the biggest one and the littlest one. Get your runt and test those two. And we ask that you do that around 3 to 4 weeks of age. So before you would normally begin that vaccination schedule. When you send them in, be sure to highlight the box that says that you have high risk of parvo. One thing I also want to make sure to point out is that we have this new monoclonal antibody product that's available from Elanco. It's a good product, and it's really something that you should ask your vet to have on hand in case you need it, in case the virus wins for one reason or another. So I see that I'm already up to an hour. I can talk quickly about canine core antibody, or I can just stop there. Is there guidance from the moderators?
Please continue if you're
Continue.
available.
Okay. Oh yeah, I love to talk about this. So when we're talking about antibody testing just in general for adult dogs, these are non-breeding bitches, every 3-year interval is plenty. We've seen that those antibody titers last for a good long time. And I've got posters on the website that talk about all of that. With the breeding dams, with the nomograph, it is ideal if you could get a nomograph for each litter. And the reason for that is then you have the most up-to-date titers for the dam to do a comparison with the puppies, right, when you do your follow-up. But in general, if you have one for a year, that's plenty, because titers just don't change so long as your bitch is protected. If she were exposed, we tend to not see the titer make a difference. It doesn't change. We suggest on our reports that puppies be tested by quantitative methods. That means an actual dilution, a tighter number, right? So that you can better differentiate their response from potentially maternal antibodies still remaining. When you have these done through our lab, we have the DAMS titers in the same assay and can put them side by side, like the graphics I showed you for Pringles and Amelia. So there are also what we call qualitative antibody tests. These are like this one here. This is the VacciCheck, which is just a color change assay. It's a yes or no. Is that antibody above the level of protection or not? This is a perfectly fine assay for most instances where you have, your dog is due for vaccines and you want to know if there would be a benefit to it or not, you could use this assay. You could also use this one for your puppy follow-ups if you know that maternal antibodies should be gone. Otherwise, I believe they are labeled for use at 20 weeks of age or older. But it is a good assay, and there's literature that we recently published that shows it's diagnostically accurate. What we do here are gold standard tests where we do multiple dilutions, and it's functional because we're looking to see how your dog's antibody interacts with infectious virus and when can we see that effect stop. And as I've said earlier, we have correlated them to challenge of immunity studies. So the last few slides are mostly just science-y slides where I'm talking about some different studies that we did. This one, we looked at 5,054 individual vaccinated dogs that we were looking for risk factors that might rise to the surface for why they are not protected by antibody. Many things we looked at were not significant, including time since they were last vaccinated. What did come to the top were certain breeds here. For parvo, it was the Nova Scotia Duck-Tolling Retriever, Irish Setter, Hungarian Vizsla. For distemper, Yorkshire Terrier, and Boxer. But number one, the biggest one, was age under 1 year under 1 year of age. However, when we sorted those out to, well, was a nomograph done or not, we found that when the nomograph had been done, there was no difference between the puppies and the adult population. But without the nomograph, it was. So we did more studies on this. We brought in more puppies. Here's a study that was published in Therogenology back in September of 2020. So we had 506 nomograph puppies and 235 puppies without a nomograph. And we compared their rate of protection to adult vaccinates. And it's just the same results as the previous study, but now we have a larger group. Other studies that we've done, all of these are posters that you can find on our website. The most recent paper that we just published will probably be the most interesting to you, and that's here, where we found that colostrum formation does affect circulating titer for the bitch. So this will inform the best timing for collecting samples from your bitches. Once they start forming colostrum, they're actively pulling antibody from their circulation into their mammary gland, right? So from 2 weeks before whelp window to 2 weeks after whelp window, they're either decreasing their titer by making colostrum or they're recovering from that time frame. So we prefer that you avoid that month right around whelp on either side, 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there, to get the most accurate nomograph. If you cannot otherwise, right, if you have to do your sample, then please indicate that on the form so we can do a little tweak to control for that timing. Okay, so here's my take-home points. Modified live vaccines must infect to immunize. That is so important that you remember that. Judicious use of our core viral vaccines induces very good immunity. I talked quite a bit about sterilizing immunity. The window of susceptibility is a very important concept that I really hope I managed to get across, where we have that waning maternal antibody. It's a danger point in your puppy's life. Nomographs can help with that, and antibody testing in general is just a good tool to know more what's going on with immunity in your dogs. Okay, so that's it, and I hope there's time for questions.
Yes, I think we have time for a couple. Thank you so much. That was really, really fantastic information that I think so many people need to hear and, like you mentioned, have a hard time maybe understanding. And so that was really laid out fantastically. You covered a lot of information during the presentation, but always like to, I think, review is helpful. A couple of questions were relating to the timing of the blood draw. So both one asking when's the best time to draw, and another one being how late can you draw for it still to be accurate? Is there kind of an endpoint where it is no longer effective?
Yeah, like I mentioned, a year is actually fine. One nomograph over the course of a year, because if your bitch is protected it's not going to change that much. As far as timing too late, the thing there is, you kind of want to give yourself time to put together a nice packet for the, your going home packet with the nomograph information and, the suggested vaccination schedule and all that. And often I find people get into the stress mode of, wow, I got to get this done. So I think it should be done early in pregnancy when you're going in anyway for like progesterone testing or your ultrasound, things like that. You're going to the vet anyway. Get a blood draw at that time, process the serum. And you know what? You could even then just freeze it, right? Freeze it at that time. And if, for instance, perhaps your bitch reabsorbs her litter or it just doesn't take, then you don't have to submit it, but you've gathered that sample at the right time.
Yeah, really helpful. Another question we had was relating to the, I believe probably a qualitative reading, but if I run titer testing, the result comes back negative, does that mean I should revaccinate?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Frequently we'll find bitches that are not protected for one reason or another. And then in the section where it says next action, we will say vaccinate with litter. Because of course you don't want to vaccinate during pregnancy.
Fantastic. And I think we have one more, at least topic or theme. It's relating to what does the current education on this topic subsist of for veterinarians, whether it be in school or what have you, and then recommendations, I guess, for practices to implement. I think, if you go to your general practice, yes, I think, when I was in general practice, we ran titers mostly for travel, as you can imagine, relating to rabies. But for your general practice where we're going through the puppy series and trying to implement this, what recommendations might you have to either increase awareness or increase, implementation?
Yeah, yeah. So right now, I think I'm the only one who teaches about it in veterinary school. I think only the UW vet students hear it. It's unfortunate. This actually is a very old technology. It was first started in the 1950s, 1958. Dr. Baker from Cornell started this for distemper. Um, and in the intervening years, it fell out of favor because it was not easy to get titers done. But Dr. Schultz brought it back, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, because now we can do titers more easily and it's offered in more places. As far as spreading the word, I don't know. There's the paper in Theragenology. I'm trying to get other papers written. It seems papers are the way to go rather than discussions. But the other thing too is for breeders to ask for it. And you'll find more likely to be able to have your vet understand what it is and know about it if it's your repro vet rather than your regular vet.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Dr. Larson, this was incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to give this to our community. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. This was so exciting for us to kind of bring both of these different events to life for everyone. So we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you're not yet a member of our Good Dog community, you can apply to join at gooddog.com/join so you can stay up to date on all of our future webinars and events. And to give everyone very quickly a sneak peek of what we're going to be covering next month, on Wednesday, March 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be covering common reproductive emergencies with Dr. Carla Barstow. We're really excited about that. So keep an eye out for when that's formally announced on Facebook so everyone can register for that. And then that's also where Dr. Hesser is going to be joining us again for session 2 of our Breeding Masterclass series. And she's going to be covering late ultrasounds and x-rays. So please come prepared with questions. But until then, thank you again for being here. Thank you, Dr. Larson, and we will
Thank
see you
you.
at our next webinar. Bye, everyone. Thank you.